Good evening. Um, this is going to sound probably kind of messed up. I don't like to talk in front of people, but I'll give it my best shot. I'm Tom Swanson. This is my PowerPoint assignment for Local Government Planning, Unit 4. And I'm going to talk about what some of the risks are for nonprofits who lose their tax exempt status. What happens in that regard. And so away we go. Some of the risks for nonprofit, or for, I'm sorry, some of the risks for tax exempt status for nonprofits. Nonprofit organizations cannot campaign for or against a specific party. They that do run the risk of losing their tax exempt status. Nonprofits can lobby for an issue, or they can engage in other issues like helping with voting, that kind of thing, but that's separate. There is a fine line there, and there's an important difference between the issue and the candidate. Very important, but very fine line, but very important. Next, lobbying is permitted, and that's not the same thing as campaigning. If too much time and effort is spent on lobbying, though, it becomes campaigning, and this risks the status of the nonprofit as well. And important to note that the assets of a charitable nonprofit can be considered a campaign contribution, but that's after the fact. They work with voter registration. Charitable nonprofits can work with voter registration. They can help get people out to vote about a specific issue. Losing the tax exempt status, though, if they start campaigning, which is, I'll talk about that later on, some of the later slides, that can actually have a huge impact there. There are some issues, though, that with latest legislation for problems or for tax exempt status for nonprofits, where it can be a bit of a problem. We run into the issues on free speech and whether or not it's safe to stay silent when campaigning might actually work. Find these things in domestic violence nonprofits. They speak out about a specific issue, and that becomes more of the campaigning side of things, and then they risk losing their nonprofit status. Another part of the risks for tax exempt status is the separation of church and state. Is that still a valid argument? Religious nonprofits, in order to be declared a nonprofit, they have to initiate certain government protocols, and those are public policy. That means things like maintaining gender assignments or sex or political affiliation. Not really that, but religious leaders don't like this, and they try to resist. We find this with things like with universities and things like that. If it's a religious, if let's say you have a university that was formed from a religious church, something along those lines, and they don't want to follow along with specific government protocols, the government can take away their nonprofit status. They attempt to lobby for the issue again, and religious organizations argue that this is more of a freedom of speech or a freedom of religion. But the IRS monitors these groups, and they will revoke tax exempt status for these groups if they are found to be campaigning or they're found to be campaigning. If they do this where it's more for a specific issue there, where they're not following along, they lose their tax exempt status. And it should be noted here, nonprofit organizations are not supposed to be creating issues. They are there because they are supposed to be dealing with a specific issue. Nonprofit organizations who lose their tax exempt status, they often go bankrupt. They're no longer relevant. some of the problems there. You might have an organization that does real good work for people, and as a result of their inability to control that, now they're not there anymore, and that's an asset that now we don't have. There are penalties, pretty stiff ones. There can be fines, other government sanctions. So next, some of the scenarios. We've talked a little bit about what it means to lobby. Now, lobbying, as we know, is when you move toward a specific issue. You're trying to get people to agree with you, and you're trying to get a bunch of people behind you for a specific issue to be passed. Campaigning is very similar to that, but it's not the same thing. Campaigning is where you have a specific candidate who's doing that and trying to get people behind him or her. So first scenario is a nonprofit has an issue that it wants resolved. Now, in this case, you take your pick. Taxes, AIDS, whatever. Say in this particular issue is championed by a certain candidate who's running for office. The candidate and his nonprofit become connected through the lobbying efforts of the nonprofit. But there's more to this. The representatives from the nonprofit start to actively campaign for the candidate. By doing so, they work on this, and they allow the candidate to come and speak at a function that's directly related to his or her campaign. The IRS monitors this. They penalize the nonprofit and they remove the tax-exempt status of the nonprofit due to their actions. So the board of the nonprofit, they have to pay stiff fines, and they're forced to dissolve the nonprofit. That can actually happen. So that's one scenario. Second scenario, go the other way. Nonprofit is working on a specific issue that's important to its members. They come in contact with a candidate that is passionate about a specific issue. Happens all the time. Instead of campaigning for this candidate, the nonprofit continues to lobby for a specific issue as a separate entity from the candidate. They don't connect. The nonprofit actively encourages people to vote and get involved, does not specifically encourage voting for one candidate over another. Only that specific issue is what they're interested in. The candidate asked to speak at a function held by the nonprofit related to his or her campaign directly. So him or her asks, can we come talk about my issue and one of your functions? The representative from the nonprofits tell him or her no, that they cannot allow him to do this, as it will place their tax-exempt status at risk. Instead, the candidate comes and talks about something related to the nonprofit itself, keeps to that topic. Now, the scenario there, no problem. Works just fine, tax exempt, IRS monitors that, everything is good to go. Two very different outcomes from each scenario. First scenario results in a loss of tax exempt status, punishment for the nonprofit. Second scenario results in nonprofit continuing, maintaining tax exempt status. They have to walk a fine edge in order to stay in business for the long term. Very difficult to do. You have situations where a nonprofit organization is designed to champion a specific cause, and they're not political. Side note here, they shouldn't be political. Very difficult not to be, but they're supposed to be called nonpartisan. In other words, it's about the issue. It's not about one specific political group or another. If it becomes too much about one or the other, then now you're campaigning, you're getting in the politics, and that's a problem. They don't stay objective. Nonprofits are supposed to stay objective. As a result of that, that's why they get their tax exempt status. That's how they're able to do that. The government gives them that consideration because of the way they're set up. If they fudge the lines a little bit, then they're out. And these are my references. Thank you very much. Hope you guys enjoyed the slideshow. my PowerPoint slideshow, my PowerPoint. I appreciate your time and hope you guys have a good day.